Okay, let's dive into Canada's budget 2025. Now, this isn't your typical budget breakdown full of dry numbers. The government itself is calling this a massive fundamental shift for the country. So what does that actually mean? We're going to break it down using the budget's own words to see what they're getting at. And I mean, right from the get-go, they are not messing around. This quote from the foreword of the budget sets a super dramatic tone. They're saying this isn't just a small change, it's a rupture. They're signaling a major break from the past, basically saying the old economic playbook just won't cut it anymore. All right, so here's our game plan for this explainer. First, we're going to look at the big economic challenges Canada's facing right now. Then we'll get into the government's core strategy. After that, we'll dive into the huge investments and support programs and, the big question, how are they planning to pay for it all? And we'll wrap up by looking at the long-term vision they're trying to sell. Okay, let's start with the why. What problem is this budget even trying to solve? Well, the government is calling this a pivotal economic moment, and that's really just a way of saying that Canada is up against some serious economic headwinds. So what are those headwinds? Well, the budget points to what's basically a perfect storm of pressures. You've got the cost of living, which is still squeezing families. You have all this global uncertainty making things unpredictable. And then there are these rising trade tariffs causing major headaches. The bottom line here, the government is saying, look, what we were doing before just isn't going to work anymore. The status quo is officially off the table. And if you want to see how this stuff hits you in real life, look no further than your grocery bill. This chart, and we're using the budget's own data here, it shows how Canada's food inflation stacks up against other major G7 economies. It's a really clear picture of how those big global forces end up affecting all of us right at the checkout counter. Okay, so given all those challenges, what's the actual plan? What's the strategy? That brings us to what the government is calling its core strategy, which is pretty much the anchor for its entire long-term economic plan. And that strategy really boils down to 4 main goals. First, harnessing what we're good at, things like our energy sector, critical minerals, and AI. Second, unifying our own economy by, breaking down those annoying trade and labor barriers between provinces. Third, really leaning into the clean economy and becoming a leader in net zero projects. And finally, protecting our key industries so they can stay competitive and, frankly, survive whatever comes next. So a strategy is great, but how does it actually turn into action? Well, the first huge piece of the puzzle is all about building Canada's future economy. And what that really means is big money. We're talking massive investments designed to kickstart growth and make our economy more productive. And when I say big money, I mean it. Check this out. $115 billion. That's the headline number for major infrastructure projects over the next 5 years. This isn't just about patching up roads. The government is framing this as a massive bet on nation building, trying to spark a whole new wave of economic activity. So you're probably wondering, okay, $115 billion, where's all that cash going? Well, the biggest slice of the pie, about $54 billion, is for what you'd call core public infrastructure. Think transit, clean water, that kind of thing. But there's also a ton of money for things like health and innovation, plus significant funding for Indigenous and municipal communities. Now, it's one thing to announce a ton of money, but it's another to actually get things built, right? So to handle that, they're creating a brand new major projects office with over $213 million in funding. The goal here is pretty simple. Cut through the red tape and make sure these huge projects actually get finished on time and on budget. Of course, it's not all just about government spending. The budget also introduces tools to get private companies to invest their own money. One of the big ones is this productivity super deduction. The easiest way to think about it? It's basically a big tax break for businesses that invest in new technology and equipment, the kind of stuff that makes them more productive and efficient. And it's a similar idea with the SR&D tax incentives. SR&D stands for Scientific Research and Experimental Development. This is another tool in the toolbox, and it's all about giving tax credits to businesses of all sizes to do their research and development right here in Canada instead of somewhere else. The big idea is to build up our own homegrown innovation ecosystem. Okay, so we've talked a lot about the big picture economy, infrastructure, productivity, R&D, but what about direct support for people? Let's shift gears and look at how this budget plans to support Canadians and our communities. So what are some of the key things here? Well, the budget aims to make the National School Food Program permanent. It's introducing a new temporary tax credit for personal support workers. It's also launching a youth climate corps to give young people paid training for green jobs. And there's a big focus on building more cooperative housing and renewing funding for clean drinking water in First Nations communities. And to give you a real-world example of what this means, let's take that school food program. The budget estimates that for a family with 2 kids in the program, it could mean saving around $800 a year on groceries. So that's how a big government policy can translate directly into your household budget. And no surprise here, housing is a huge, huge focus. The budget is launching a new program called Build Canada Homes, and they're not shy about calling it the most ambitious housing plan in a generation. The core idea is simple but massive. Tackle the affordability crisis by dramatically cranking up the supply of new homes across the country. All right, so we've got all these massive investments in infrastructure, in people, in housing, which leads to the million-dollar, or I guess billion-dollar question. How are we paying for all of this? This brings us to a really interesting part of the budget's argument, this idea of investing more, spending less. And this slide really lays out their whole fiscal strategy. It's kind of like a balancing act. On one side, you have spending less. This is about cutting the day-to-day costs of running the government, things like right-sizing the public service and using tech to be more efficient. And on the other side, you have investing more. The idea is to take all the money saved from those cuts and plow it back into those big long-term investments that are supposed to grow the economy. So what does right-sizing the public service actually look like? Well, take a look at this chart. After growing and hitting a peak in 2023, the plan is to shrink the number of federal jobs, mostly through people retiring or leaving, not mass layoffs. The projection is to bring the size of the public service back down towards where it was relative to Canada's population before the pandemic. And the grand total? All of those cuts and efficiencies are projected to add up to $44.2 billion in savings over the next 5 years. That's the pot of money they're planning to use to fund all those big priorities we've been talking about. Okay, so let's bring this all together. We've seen the problems, the strategy, the spending, and the savings. So let's wrap up by looking at what the budget calls Canada's path forward, the big, long-term vision they're painting. So when you put all the pieces together, what's the end goal? What's the vision? Well, it's a future where Canada drives up its productivity and rebuilds its industrial strength. It's a Canada that builds way more homes while also leveraging its natural resources. The goal is to create more high-paying careers by having a more unified domestic market. And ultimately, it's about making sure the country is on solid economic ground for generations to come. And that brings us right back to that powerful quote we saw at the very beginning. The budget calls all of this a generational shift, a rupture. It's a really bold claim, and it leaves us with one big question to think about. What will that shift actually look like for you?
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we are plunging into a really foundational document. Carries far more weight than its title might suggest. Canada's Budget 2025.
That's right.
And this isn't just, a list of deficits and spending programs. Our source material, it frames this document as nothing less than a blueprint to defend our sovereignty in a moment of global rupture. I mean, that's a pretty serious declaration for an economic plan.
It really is. And that urgency, you can feel it defining the entire document. Our mission today is, well, to move past maybe some of the rhetoric and really extract the specific strategic choices the government's making here.
Okay.
We need to understand the new rules they're writing for Canadian finances, where they're placing these massive bets on technology and resources, and how these multi-billion-dollar decisions directly affect you. Your ability to afford housing, say, your job security, the services you rely on.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're going to unpack this brand new fiscal architecture they're talking about, dive deep into the strategic investments aimed at, future-proofing sectors like AI and critical minerals.
Key areas.
And analyze the major, and let's face it, politically charged changes coming to immigration policy, housing supply, and even the efficiency of the public service itself. Let's unpack this, starting with that dire global context the source material lays out.
Well, the government's perspective seems pretty clear. The world is undergoing a rupture. That's their word, a generational shift, not some kind of smooth transition.
Right, not just change, but a rupture.
Exactly. This is about instability, real threats to sovereignty, and this realization that supply chains, well, they can be weaponized. And that narrative, it really underpins why they feel they have to make these massive strategic investments now.
And domestically, of course, that volatility crashes right into problems we already know about. The persistently high cost of living, that weak productivity growth that's frankly plagued Canada for years.
Yeah, for a long time.
And a worrying uptick in unemployment, particularly hitting those trade-exposed areas like manufacturing.
But what's fascinating here, I think, is how the budget tries to balance those domestic pressures against Canada's comparative fiscal strength. The source material really emphasizes that Canada maintains the lowest net debt-to-GDP ratio among G7 nations.
Just holding that title.
Still holding it. And critically, we are one of only 2 G7 economies, the other being Germany, that still boasts a AAA credit rating.
Okay, so why should the average listener care about a AAA rating? What does that actually mean?
Well, that rating is effectively a gold star from global investors. It signals exceptional fiscal stability, meaning when the government goes to borrow billions of dollars, they get the best possible interest rates.
Okay.
They borrow cheaper than nearly everyone else in the G7, which, strategically frees up capital to pay for exactly the kind of big investments we're about to discuss.
So they feel they have the capacity, the borrowing room, and they're using it to institute this major architectural overhaul in how they manage their books, the new capital budgeting framework.
Okay.
Now, this sounds technical, maybe a bit dry, but it feels like a massive philosophical shift.
It truly is. This is a fundamental change, really designed to modernize fiscal planning. Previously, all government spending was largely just lumped together. Now they are explicitly drawing a clear line between day-to-day operational spending, think salaries, utility bills, and long-term investments, which they're now calling capital formation.
Okay, capital formation. But let's be honest here. Is this just an accounting trick? I mean, if you suddenly reclassify borrowing as investment that generates, long-term assets, doesn't it just make the immediate deficit numbers look a bit more palatable?
Well, that is the political calculation baked into the plan. Yes, you've hit on it. The key insight here, I think, is that the capital budgeting framework is designed to create a kind of political firewall.
Ah, okay.
It allows the government to project fiscal conservatism on the day-to-day running of the country while, at the same time, borrowing pretty aggressively for infrastructure and future productivity gains.
Right. And this new framework, it's tied to 2 core fiscal anchors that are supposed to guide the entire plan. Is that right?
Exactly. The first is a commitment to balancing that day-to-day operational spending with revenues by 2028-29.
Okay, the operating budget.
The operating side, yeah. And the second is simply maintaining a declining deficit to GDP ratio overall. The ultimate goal, they state, is that by 2028-29, all deficits should solely reflect investments that are supporting long-term capital formation.
So the idea is...
They're trying to ensure that every dollar borrowed goes toward building something tangible, not just, subsidizing current expenses.
That distinction, borrowing to build versus borrowing to operate, that's a powerful narrative pivot, isn't it? It signals a real shift toward asset creation on the balance sheet.
Okay, so we've established the balance sheet strength, relatively speaking, and the new rules of the game. Now let's talk about where those capital investment dollars are actually going. It seems heavily focused on boosting productivity and innovation.
Very much so. They are reinforcing Canada's positioning by calling it the most tax-competitive jurisdiction for new business investment in the G7. And how? Through targeted measures like the productivity super deduction. Productivity super deduction.
Yeah.
Okay, for the average factory owner, maybe someone listening to this, what does that actually unlock? What does it mean in practice?
It means if you are a business investing in new machinery, new equipment, or even intangible assets like software, you get to deduct more than 100% of that cost against your taxable income right away.
Oh, wow.
They've accelerated capital cost allowances so that immediate expensing is now available for almost all assets in the manufacturing sector. It's really a massive incentive to upgrade technology and boost that manufacturing capacity right now.
And crucially, it looks like they're finally addressing the, well, let's call it the beleaguered Scientific Research and Experimental Development Program, SR&ED. That program has been just a source of endless bureaucratic frustration for years, hasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And the source material actually acknowledges that the previous burdensome administrative process severely limited SR&ED's impact. The Canada Revenue Agency, the CRA, is now tasked with implementing transformative reforms to streamline the administration.
So the hope is?
The hope is that by cutting the red tape, small and medium-sized businesses will finally have the confidence to actually use the program and increase that vital R&D investment,
This links directly back to that whole global rupture narrative you mentioned.
Mm.
Artificial intelligence. The government is treating AI investment almost as essential to national security and sovereignty, committing nearly $1 billion.
Yeah, this feels like a direct operational response to that sense of global hostility or competition. It's a specific commitment, $925.6 million over 5 years. And it's to support a large-scale sovereign public AI infrastructure
Sovereign public AI.
and the development of a sovereign Canadian cloud. This isn't just about faster computing, it's really about owning our data, ensuring our security, and retaining the economic capacity needed to compete globally without, relying too heavily on foreign entities.
And at the same time, they're paying Statistics Canada $25 million for the Artificial Intelligence and Technology Measurement Program, TechStat. Seems smart to invest in actually measuring the disruption as it's happening.
Absolutely. If you don't track the impact of AI on the labor force, on productivity, you really can't adapt policy effectively, can you?
Makes sense.
Now, moving over to the resource side, the climate competitiveness strategy aims to capitalize on Canada's existing low-carbon advantage, especially since our power sector is already significantly cleaner than most of our G7 peers.
Right, we have that head start. But scaling up means huge amounts of capital. How are they planning to mobilize investment into, say, critical minerals? That's key for batteries, EVs.
Yeah, exactly. They're doing it by creating the Critical Minerals Sovereign Fund. This is backed by $2 billion cash, kicking in around 2026-27. And crucially, this fund is not just a grant program. It's designed to make strategic investments. We're talking equity stakes, loan guarantees, directly into critical minerals projects.
So the government takes a stake.
Exactly. It ensures taxpayer money is leveraged alongside private capital to establish those secure supply chains, both for clean technologies and, importantly, for defense as well.
And they tweaked the investment structure too, didn't they? Expanding eligibility for the Critical Mineral Exploration Tax Credit.
They did. They added 12 new minerals to the list, things like bismuth, cesium, indium, tungsten. It's really about trying to capture the entire value chain, from exploration right through to processing here in Canada.
Okay, let's shift gears to the immediate issues facing, well, you, the listener. Housing and affordability. The government is branding this Canada's most ambitious housing plan in a generation. Big words, totaling $25 billion over 5 years.
Ambitious is right. And the centerpiece is this new Build Communities Strong Fund. It's a massive commitment, $51 billion over 10 years.
$51 billion.
Yeah. And this is specifically for the infrastructure that enables housing, things like roads, water systems, wastewater treatment, and also essential institutional projects like hospitals and colleges. Because the challenge isn't just finding money for houses, it's getting them built faster, overcoming those bottlenecks.
Right. And that's where the negotiation leverage comes in, isn't it? Provinces and territories don't just get handed that money automatically, do they?
They absolutely do not. This is key. To access these funds, provinces and territories must agree to two pretty critical conditions. First, they have to cost match the federal funding.
Okay, put skin in the game.
Exactly. And second, and this is the big one, they must substantially reduce development charges that everyone agrees hinder housing supply. This conditionality, it's a powerful new tool for the federal government to try and dictate, or at least strongly influence, local planning decisions and costs.
It essentially tells local jurisdictions, look, we will help fund your water pipes, but only if you stop taxing new home builders out of existence, essentially.
That's the stick that comes with the carrot.
Right. Now, let's address the elephant in the room here, immigration. The source material is surprisingly blunt about this, noting that the temporary resident population has more than doubled since 2018 and calling the current system no longer sustainable.
Yeah, this is what they're explicitly calling the immigration reset. The new targets aim to stabilize permanent resident admissions at 380,000 annually, starting in 2026. But the most striking number, I think, is the plan to reduce the total temporary resident population down to less than 5% of the Canadian population by the end of 2027.
Wow, down to 5%.
Oh.
From what, around 7.5% now?
Around that, yeah. It's a clear acknowledgement that infrastructure capacity, and that includes housing, schools, healthcare, It just hasn't kept pace with the recent influx.
But at the same time, they're trying to attract the quote-unquote best of the best, right? It's not just about reducing numbers overall.
That's the targeted focus, exactly. They're increasing the share of economic migrants within that permanent resident target from about 59% up to 64%. Plus, there's the International Talent Attraction Strategy. That proposes nearly $1.7 billion specifically to recruit top-tier international researchers, new research chairs, postdoctoral fellows.
So it's a highly selective approach.
It is. It seems to be. Shrink the temporary population overall, but heavily recruit specific high-value talent to drive productivity and innovation.
Okay. And finally, on sort of affordability and labor protection for the average worker, what's in there?
Well, two key things jump out. They're making the National School Food Program permanent. The aim is to feed up to 400,000 children annually, which they calculate could save participating families an average of $800 a year.
Significant savings for families.
Yeah. And on the labor front, they're signaling a crackdown on bad actors. This includes increased penalties for wage theft employers not paying what's owed, and also aggressive action against improper classification.
The misclassification issue.
Right. Misclassifying employees as independent contractors, denying them basic benefits and protections. They specifically call out the trucking industry as a focus area for this. Given that whole focus on global rupture and sovereignty we talked about, defense spending is, unsurprisingly, a massive theme. The budget announces a pretty historic investment, actually, to achieve NATO's 2% defense spending target this fiscal year.
This year. That's way ahead of schedule, isn't it?
Half a decade ahead of the original schedule they'd set. So that is a significant acceleration and a big financial commitment.
And to make sure that money actually builds sovereign capacity here at home, they're introducing a new defense industrial strategy. What's the goal there?
Absolutely. The goal is basically to build things domestically, yeah. They're allocating $1.0 billion to the Defense and Security Business Mobilization Program. This offers loans and advisory services specifically tailored for small and medium-sized Canadian businesses in the defense sector.
So it's about nurturing a domestic industry.
Exactly. Ensuring that the sudden surge in defense spending feeds back into the domestic innovation economy rather than just flowing offshore.
Okay. Now, on public safety, sophisticated financial crimes seem to be a clear priority, especially given, well, how much money Canadians are apparently losing to scams.
That's right. The source documentation states Canadians lost a staggering $643 million to fraud in 2024 alone. Yeah. So in response, they're hiring 1,000 new RCMP officers and 1,000 new Canada Border Services Agency, CBSA officers. But maybe more strategically, they're creating a new financial crimes agency. This is intended to be the lead federal enforcement agency tackling those really complex financial crimes, money laundering, sophisticated online scams.
Kind of a dedicated unit. Seems necessary when the threat is getting so complex, right?
Seems like it. Finally, let's talk about internal cost savings through the Comprehensive Expenditure Review, or CER. This one hits the public service directly.
Right, the CER. What's the plan?
The CER is aimed at reducing the federal public service by roughly 40,000 positions. That's about 10% of the workforce, phased in by 2028-29.
40,000. How?
Well, the plan relies heavily on attrition, so not filling roles when people retire or leave naturally. And they're also introducing a voluntary early retirement incentive program, an ERI, for experienced employees aged 50 or over with at least 10 years of service.
Cutting 40,000 jobs. Even through attrition and incentives, that's a significant contraction. Does the source material detail if these cuts are aimed primarily at sort of back office bureaucracy, or is this likely to impact frontline services that you, the listener, might rely on?
Well, the stated goal is always efficiency and modernization, right? Framing it as creating a leaner, more agile future public service. The focus is definitely stated as reducing central bureaucracy. However, any cut of that magnitude will inevitably face scrutiny regarding its potential impact on service delivery as it actually rolls out over the next 4 years. That's something to watch.
Definitely. And finally, just quickly, a couple of targeted tax eliminations that seem to prove more hassle than they were worth.
Yeah, a bit of tax code streamlining, it seems.
Oh, yeah.
The government intends to eliminate the underused housing tax as of the 2025 calendar year. They cited the complexity of administering it, plus the fact that other measures like foreign buyer bans and provincial vacant home taxes are now in place. And they're also ending the luxury tax on aircraft and vessels. Part of the reasoning seems to be that the administrative costs and, frankly, the avoidance schemes were starting to outpace the actual revenue being generated.
So, just simplifying things there. Wow. We've covered a remarkable range of policies today, everything from that major re-architecture of federal accounting, the capital budgeting framework, to the really aggressive conditionality being placed on those housing funds for provinces.
Right.
And that crackdown on misclassified workers.
Yeah, the core narrative really feels like a massive strategic reorientation. This budget seems to accept a volatile global reality and is focusing nearly, $1 trillion in total leverageable investment over 5 years. That's public and private money combined on future productivity drivers.
Yeah.
AI, critical minerals, and that crucial housing supply.
So the focus is shifting.
Shifting the country, the argument goes, from reliance to resilience in a much more complicated world.
And ultimately, you listening right now, you are the stakeholder in this huge national plan. I mean, every major policy area, from the rate your local factory can expense new equipment to the conditions under which a new hospital might get built in your city, it's all covered in here somewhere.
And, that leads us neatly to the final provocative thought for today. This new fiscal framework, it aims to make capital investment comprise 100% of the federal deficit by 2028-29. It's signaling that current borrowing is generating tangible long-term assets. But this ambitious plan fundamentally relies on attracting something like $500 billion in additional private sector investment to come off the sidelines and match the public effort.
That's the big if.
That's the huge if. If that required private capital doesn't fully materialize, will this new fiscal architecture be remembered as savvy governance that strategically invested for the future? Or will it just look like a sophisticated accounting maneuver that masked debt for the next generation to deal with? That tension, I think, that's what will define the next few years.